Okay, so I'll go by Rachel or Rachel, not by Dr. Werczberger. And I'm here to talk a little bit about my research. And more generally about Jewish identity and Jewish spirituality in Israel, but also maybe a little bit we can discuss what's going on in your life here in the States. As Philip said, I'm a sociologist and anthropologist, which means I did field work. We call how many people here are from somewhere this close to these disciplines? Yeah, okay, great. So what we actually do as anthropologists is we go to the field. We live with the people, we see what people do, we participate in what takes and what's going on, and then we go back home and try to write it up into something sort of a coherent description and argument of what we've seen. So my PhD project was on two Jewish renewal or Jewish New Age communities that were active in Israel in the beginning of the 20th century. These two communities, and if time will allow us, how much time do I have?
Whatever you want.
Okay, and 45 minutes, okay, sure. So I may, in the end of my lecture, maybe I will talk a little bit about the two communities I studied, but in general, what they try to do is sort of integrate between Jewish tradition and New Age spirituality in a non-orthodox way. So I will be talking a little bit about that, but before I get to that stage, I would like to frame a little bit what my project is all about and what's going on in terms of New Age spirituality in general and in Israel in particular, especially because the Israeli case is very different from Judaism here in the United States. So I think it's worthwhile discussing a little bit what's going on in Israel. Just for my information, how many people here have been in Israel? Not talking about the rabbis. Rabbis not included. Okay, so you guys you've experienced a little bit Israel, you've seen what's going on, and we'll talk more about it when I progress in my lecture, and I have this stupid warning going on in my computer, which I have no idea how to do that. Just stop it. So I will be jumping here. Okay, so I'd like to discuss a little bit what is spirituality, I guess, before we discuss. So Rabbi Levi began with a little bit Hasidic take on spirituality. Usually when scholars refer to spirituality, they try to point that there's actually a split in the way we talk about spirituality and religion today, where spirituality is often opposed or put in, seems as or places in the opposition of religion. And the whole discussion about spirituality is partially related to the discussion about the world becoming more and more secular. Because it used to be that the social scientists and philosophers also thought that the world is becoming more and more secular, that people are becoming less religious, that the world, as modernity progresses, as scientific thought progresses, as people are becoming more and more inclined to a rational way of thinking, they will also become less and less religious. And that was a dominant way people thought about religiosity in the modern world until a few things happened recently, which sort of pointed out that this may not be happening as they thought it will. Of course, this will not work when I need it. Okay. No. Okay, so it's a low one. Okay, so this is just a couple of images to remind us that religion is back on the public sphere very strongly. Of course, the famous picture of the Twin Towers terror attack, a lady in a burqa going shopping in California, Christian evangelist in a mega church praying, and the atheist on a big publicity stunt. Can you read what's written on the bus?
I've seen that bus.
You've seen the bus?
Yeah.
Really? Where?
I grew up near Washington, D.C. I'm not sure if that's where I saw it, but
Really?
probably.
I thought it was in England, but I might be
Well,
mistaken.
there was a very, very similar publicity, like a PR campaign with this type of thing.
Okay.
What's the second line?
Stop worrying and enjoy your life.
And enjoy your life. So believing in God is opposed to having fun and enjoying. So this is what the atheists are claiming. We're trying at least to market themselves. And of course, there's so many forms of religious resurgence that the atheists are really fighting very hard for the claim. I am not going to talk about fundamentalist religion, about evangelism. It's not my point of interest in this lecture. Although there's of course many things to be said. What I'm interested in is those religious forms or spiritual forms that are active outside of institutionalized forms of religion. So these are not Christian forms of religion. These are not Islamic. They are Jewish, but with a twist, I guess. And what they're very personal. So people are trying to look for personal solutions, personal spiritual solutions for the questions and meanings in their life. They usually criticize the religious authorities, saying that institutionalized religion is not really relevant anymore, and on surveys they would identify themselves as spiritual but not religious. So they would say either Christianity, probably Christianity because most people are from the Christian West, is not really relevant anymore. It's archaical, it's old, it's not meaningful anymore. They would not go to churches, but they would sort of start making up their own religion in kind of a pick and mix method of way. So they would glean from various sources of religion, creating what. Okay, I have no idea what to do with this. It's ridiculous. Anybody here knows? Okay, I'm going to try the yes. I'm going to try the positive way. I just said no all the time. Maybe if I say yes, it will go away. So they glean and they take from different sources of religion. And they may take stuff which is from their own traditions, but they also would tend to take stuff from other religious sources which are not necessarily Western or European. So they would take from the Far East, for instance. They would go and practice yoga, they would meditate, they would practice Tai Chi, they would maybe go on a shamanic journey, explore shamanism, all sort of strange and interesting things that are happening. The first, before reaching to the New Age, which sort of started, was promoted in the 80s or the end of the 70s, we had what was called new religious movements. So that would be more in the 60s, 70s. Do you recognize who's in this picture? That's the Beatles. Yeah, you know, the rock band? Yeah. The guy is a Maharishi yogi. And the Beatles went to India and were very much influenced by the Maharishi yogi. And they even have one song, which I don't remember. Do you remember? Okay, all of us should go and do some homework about Beatles and the Maharishi yogi. We have all sort of new religious movements. Some of them originated really in the 50s and 60s. Some of them are a little bit newer. Scientology is pretty strong now, pretty present in all over the media. Tom Cruise is very much involved in Scientology. There are all kind of new religious movements that are centered around the ideas of UFOs and aliens visiting and having some sort of a religious creed to share. Some Far Eastern influenced movements. Sometimes these movements are considered to be cults. And cults, a lot of people use the word cult as in derogatory. How do you say that? Derogatory, thank you. I forgot to apologize for my English. Derogatory ways, thinking that people who join these cults are brainwashed and they're following usually a guru, a spiritual guru, maybe charlatan, which in some case can be. I mean, sometimes it's true and sometimes not necessarily. I mean, I would not call any, I mean, I wouldn't use the term cult at all. And my sense, if you, how do they say in Buddhism, if you meet the Buddha on the way, kill him. So yeah, you should suspect all spiritual leaders, but at the same time respect them and see if what is exactly their message. But what really characterizes those new religious movements or the cults, these were usually small groups with very clear borders between them and the rest of society, and people would join this cult or this group and would live and disengage from the family, and there was this whole thing. I'm just going to leave it. Okay, for now. And people were, and the families were really worried about them, and there was all this abduction and anti-brainwashing things going on in the 60s. So this whole thing about cults. But in this, later on in the 70s, 80s, the sort of new religious movements became more or less integrated within the mainstream, and they did not ask their participants to disengage from the rest of the community. You can stay and do whatever you want to do, but still practice this method or that practice. So you can keep your high-profile job and career and still practice yoga or do and meditate or become a Buddhist like Leonard Cohen, singer, or be involved in all sort of other things. Among New Age practices, there's so much of them. There's yoga and Kabbalah and neo-shamanism, neo-paganism, and meditation of all sorts, mindfulness and vipassana, and channeling. People channel entities, believing that by communicating with these entities, they try to heal themselves. And human potential workshops where people try to feel empowered and reach for self-fulfillment and realization, and loads of mind-body techniques, and I can go on and on with all sort of things that are going on in your spirituality. What typifies this sort of things that New Age is not a movement. I mean, sometimes it's called the New Age movement, but it's really not a movement because you don't have a clear organizational boundary. You don't have one Torah, you don't have one creed, you don't have a leader. It's made of a network, actually, of little groups, ideas, people who switch from that to that. They're seekers. Usually these people define themselves seeker. They're looking for the truth. They're looking for a way of finding their own authentic truth and their own authentic self, and they go around through this various path of different practices and things they do. Sort of a pick and mix way, and these are exactly the people who would define themselves as spiritual but not religious. So few things that are, there's many things that characterizes the religious forms of New Age, but I will mention three that I think are the central ones. So first of all, it's very eclectic or hybrid. I mean, you can really integrate between different ideas, practices from different cultures, from different locations in the world, from different times in history. So you can build on the idea of paganism, pagan worship, which allegedly took place before Christianity, and then build on this, take this idea of paganism and then integrate it with feminist idea, and then create your own goddess religion. Women, actually, it's a feminist thing, goddess religion. So women who worship the mother goddess. So there's ideas taken from human potential movement and positive psychology. It's really, really eclectic mix. It's almost the idiosyncratic bricolage, where people just take their own things and sort of create their own spirituality. Some of the criticism of New Age is exactly because of that, because people are saying, okay, so each person is doing his own thing. So what's behind it? I mean, it's all about narcissism. What's good for me? What's talking to me? What do I connect to? So there's a lot of critique in this sense in New Age. Another aspect of New Age is the emphasis on experience. So people are looking to experience things, and they're trying to experience things through their body and through their emotion. It's not, most of New Age spirituality is not about learning new stuff. It's not about high moral philosophies. It's about knowing through experience of the body and emotion. And because of that, rituals are very strong in New Age. Things you actually do. You don't sit and learn from a text. Texts, if they are texts, they would usually accompany the practical side and not be the central thing. It's very, in this sense, it's very different than Judaism, where the text is in the center, right? And we study the text, And then from the text, we learn what we should do, even though we do have nishma v'naseh, but I think at least in Judaism, there's at least this sort of tension between knowing and doing. And in New Age, it's definitely the doing part, which is the strongest part. And that's why we can find so many rituals and emphasis on ritualizing in New Age techniques. And we can find a lot of mind-body techniques. All these methods like yoga, like Tai Chi, like so many numbers of them that believe that when you practice something in a physical way, you also influence your spirituality. And the last thing that I think is characteristics of the New Age is this emphasis on the self. It's this idea that the self itself, that myself is in a way sacred. That God is not outside there, God is inside me. And, okay, we have a scary visitor. Hi. So we have this idea, there's a sociologist of New Age called Paul Hillis, and he calls this the sacralization of the self. So he basically draws on the idea of Charles Taylor, who's a philosopher, about the subjective turn of this time, where people turn inside themselves looking for answers. So instead of looking for answers from outside authority, the way maybe some of you would go to a rabbi or to a teacher, people are looking inside themselves to find the answers. And they're looking inside themselves, and the self becomes the utmost authority because the self itself is sacred. It's holy. It's your nitzotz neshama that's inside you. But if at least in Hasidism, this nitzotz neshama is already considered as a part of God, then the New Age version of it would drop God off. I mean, God would not, there may be some sort of energy, a higher form of life somewhere out there, but you would not be reaching outside, you'll be reaching inside yourself to find your own answers, your own inner truth. And I think that's why there's so much effort in these practices, in discovering the authentic self, trying to understand who are you exactly and what you want to do in life and what is meaningful for you in life, because the self is considered sacred. So this is just like a very general background on New Age spirituality in general, and now I turn to talk a little bit about Israel. And before I talk about New Age spirituality and Jewish spirituality in Israel, I would like to just use part of my time to describe a little bit what's going on in Israel in terms of religion, because Israel is very unique in the sense, it's a very unique place in general, but also in the sense of the place of religion in Israel, because Israel, of course, you know, it's a Jewish state, right? Which means it offers, Judaism has a priority, I guess, and Jewish people have priority as part of the country. And this is of course established through laws. First of all, I mean, you have the law of the right of return. If you're a Jew, you can come to Israel and become a citizen of the state of Israel without proving anything besides your Judaism. But it's more than the law of return. I mean, Israel, by defining itself as a Jewish and democratic country, Israel tried to establish itself as some sort of baseline of being Jewish. So there are all sort of Jewish laws that are there. So beside the language, of course, which is Hebrew, which is a Jewish language, though some would say Yiddish is a Jewish language. There's a lot of Jewish stuff going on. So there's a Chok HaChazir, the law of pig, that you cannot sell ham or bacon or pork. Sorry, I think the word would be pork in Israel. And Jewish holidays are celebrated in Israel. So the education system is built according to the Jewish holidays. So you have holidays for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and so on, way too many holidays if you ask me as a mother. There is no separation. That's another aspect of this very maybe problematic status of this, of being a Jewish country, that there's no separation between state and religion. So the state sanctioned Jewish law, and this is especially prominent in all matters of getting married and divorced, because the only way you can get married in Israel is through the Rabbanut, the state Rabbanut. You cannot get civil marriage in Israel, for instance. So if you want to get married, you have to be married in the Rabbanut, and then they check that you're Jewish, and they check all kind of other things. Same goes for getting divorced. So there's a lot of things that are the outcome of Israel being as a Jewish state. Now, the second thing that we should be aware of when we talk about religion in Israel is this distinction between what in Hebrew we would call datin chiloni, religious and secular. In English, it's always difficult when we discuss these issues in English, because we don't use in English the same terms. Because if I would translate datin chiloni, that would be probably Orthodox and non-observant Jew. But in Israel, we don't have. There's no other denominations beside Orthodoxy. So all the team, there's tiny or very small Reform communities, progressive communities, but they are really not don't have much influence. And the main Jewish identity is considered to be the Orthodox identity. So what do you have? You don't have the denominations the way you have it here. Growing up, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, whatever. What you do have is you grew up you are either an Orthodox, a Dati, or a Chiloni, which means you're not Dati. So Chiloni can mean many things. It can be that you may be doing some Jewish practice in your life, but you're not observe Taryag mitzvot, and it could mean that you're an atheist, and you could be anti-religious. It would mean many things. So I think the best term to use is really non-observant, because you don't observe the whole package. And you have what the result is that basically when we look at religious people in the options of religious identity in Israel, we find basically 4 options. The first one would be, in Hebrew, we would say Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox. In ultra-Orthodox, it's actually very wide in definition. It would include all kinds of Hasidism. It would also include the Litvaks. It would include the very, very extreme anti-Zionist Hasidiyot like Satmer and Toldot Aaron. It would also include the Anglo-Saxon modern ultra-Orthodox living in Yefenov. It's a very inclusive word, but in general, these people would be recognized as Haredim, as ultra-Orthodox, and they would probably I'm saying because I'm talking for them right now, define themselves or identify themselves as such because, first of all, they are either against or ambivalent about the Zionist state, the state of Israel. Should have it been created, they might be against it, they might not be against it, but this kind of ambivalence, and they usually would not be serving in the army, usually, I'm saying because some actually do. And besides the ultra-Orthodox, we have what in Hebrew we'd call Datim Lumim, or national religious, or religious Zionist. And those would be the people who are Orthodox. Here in the States, we would probably consider them modern Orthodox or liberal Orthodox. But in Israel, they would just be considered Orthodox, and they would be, and they are very loyal to the country, to the state, to the Zionist project in its various articulations. And we have the Mesoratim, the traditional, who are somewhere in between. And we have the Chilonim. And the state is really polarized between these two systems, between Datim and Chilonim. So if you go to a school, if you send your child to a school from age 3, you would choose if you're going to, let's say, a public school, which is Dati or Chiloni. And you would go on with this sort of identification or labeling all the way through. And part of the result of this is that you have secular people who, although probably identify themselves as Jews just by growing up and living in Israel, in reality know very little about Judaism, because the families might not be that observant or not observant at all, and they would go to a secular state school, and their relationship to Judaism might be kind of in opposition or adishut, just apathic, adish. Apathetic to Judaism, something in their, something that's part of their, whoever they are, but it really doesn't mean much. And some of these people are still, and now I'm finally going back to New Age and Jewish spirituality, are still, while they would even self-identify themselves as secular, meaning they're not observant, are still looking for some sort of spirituality, from some sort of meaning in their lives. And they're looking for it in various ways, and one of these ways is New Age spirituality. And New Age is actually very strong in Israel. Really, I think it was even mentioned as one of the New Age, global New Age centers. And we have lots of New Age stuff, non-Jewish New Age stuff going on, spiritual festivals, channeling, Tai Chi, Vipassana meditation is very strong. There's loads of stuff going, and people are looking for some sort of answers. So that would be one way of people of looking, of one way of Israeli Jews looking for meaning, looking for some sort of unmediated experiences, of religious experiences through New Age spirituality. But you also have, and now I'm going to Jewish spirituality, there's also other things going on in Israel. But because this distinction between Dati and Chiluni I just mentioned, most of these other forms are within the framework of the Orthodox community. But there's really, really interesting stuff going there as well. So let's just discuss them a little bit. So the first form, which I found interesting, which is not, it's not limited only to Israel, are the Neo-Kabbalic movements. The Kabbalah Center, for instance. Have you heard about it? Okay, so in the Kabbalah Center, people are learning Kabbalah, of course, the Jewish esoteric Jewish mysticism, but they're doing it in a very, what some people would say, very non-Jewish fashion. The Kabbalah Center and its counterpart, Bnei Baruch movement, are actually based themselves on the writings of a real Kabbalic scholar from Yerushalayim, Rav Ashlag. But it's a kind of a very, very free version of Ashlag's writing, and it's really becoming a global New Age movement at this point. But at least some of the advantages of learning Kabbalah in Kabbalah centers is that you don't have to commit yourself to observant lifestyle. So some people actually in the Kabbalah Center do, but most people do not, especially not if they're not Jewish, like Madonna, right? But also Jewish people are not necessarily observant. But they do gain some sort of a spiritual meaning from it. I used to work, just as like a personal anecdote, after my army service, I worked as a gardener. Some of the strange things I did in my life. And there was this guy who just returned from his trip, an Israeli guy just returned from his trip from India. He lived 2 years in India. And then another things Israelis do in order to look for spirituality. And he started studying in the Kabbalah Center. I heard about Kabbalah. I grew up in an Orthodox family. I knew there was something called Sefer Zohar. I had no idea exactly what it is. It's like something, just people don't talk about it in good modern Orthodox families. And but this guy, Baruch, you should just sit down during our lunch breaks and open the Zohar and read. And just looked at him, and I looked into the book, and I realized it's all in Aramaic. I mean, at least I could see that. And I asked him, Baruch, I mean, I don't know Aramaic, and obviously Baruch, who grew up as a secular family, did not know any Aramaic. So I asked him, what do you understand from it? He used to sit with his finger. I now know that this technique is called scanning. he sat with a finger and just went over the sentences and asked him, so what do you get from this? From reading Kabbalah, he said, I don't understand anything, but I get the energies. So people are getting the energies also by doing this sort of reading of Kabbalah.
Tradition of the Zohar was giving them energy.
Exactly. That's why it's called the Zohar, right? Okay. So the Kabbalah Center, it's still, I wouldn't even call it included in Jewish spirituality. It's Jewish-based spirituality, but I'm not sure if I would include it inside this definition of Jewish spirituality, but these things definitely are. So actually, it's a mishmash of pictures here, a tribute to Chabad. But I actually would like to talk about Breslov a little bit, Breslov Hasidut. Did you guys know about Breslov? Yeah, what do you know about Breslov?
The graffiti all over Israel.
Okay, what is a graffiti?
Nachman Meuman.
Okay, yeah. Nachman Meuman.
You see these guys that dance, like I've heard they go in, like they're on a highway and all of a sudden they'll get out and dance in the middle of the highway and play music. And they're really just happy people all the time. They've been known to use drugs that get you high to enjoy being high and dancing a lot. And they're just they're followers of Nachman of Breslov.
Rabbi Nachman Breslov. Okay, so that's true. So the Breslover Hasidut are really based on the Hasidic court of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Rabbi Nachman was a grandchild of the Besht, or somehow related to the Besht. I'm not so sure. And it's probably grandson. And it's very different from the rest of the Hasidut, because after Rabbi Nachman passed away, they did not find a successor. They did not point to a successor. So it remained for a long time, it remained a very small Hasidut. It was called derisively as they were called the dead Hasidim by other Hasidiyot, like saying, how come you guys can call yourself Hasidim when you don't have a rabbi, right? But it has been becoming one of the biggest Hasidiyot in recent years, especially in Israel, but I think it's strong also in other places. And it's actually sort of split it into different sects of Breslov Hasidut. Why Dafka Breslov? Why did Breslov become so strong? Because Breslov can be found some of those elements that spiritual people are looking for. There's a lot of inside reflection, sort of a psychological dimension to it. A great stress on what also can be referred to as meditation. And it's becoming really, really grew in Israel in recent years. And this Nana Nachman, this is kind of anecdotal, but the whole Nana Nachman, the graffiti, it's not, as part of it, there aren't that many graffitis right now in Israel. I think some of them have been erased, and this big wave of Nana Nachman has, at least in graffiti form, disappeared. But the story is that there's this guy, this Breslov Hasid he used to live in Tveria. He's called the Odessa. And he found a note, which in the library of the yeshiva. And in the note, written Rabbi Nachman, allegedly written by Rabbi Nachman, he said that if people, I'm kind of simplifying this, but if people say enough times, Nana Nachman Meuman, the salvation will come, Geula Tavo. So this is the source for this Nana Nachman craze thing. I've also heard that it was a prank by his friends. Doesn't matter, because for the people, the Odessa people, they really believe that saying this thing and believing the Odessa will bring Geula. So this is one of the sects. There's also other Chabadic Breslover groups going around. There's a lot of issues around Rav Berland, which I guess I won't go into now. And it's really one of the after Chabad, I think, fastest growing Hasidiyot in Israel, at least. Okay, just pictures of the famous Breslov cars. They really do stop in junctions. I mean, I've seen them. It's really funny, I guess. And this is another thing interesting thing that started it through the Breslov is a pilgrimage to Uman. Because Rabbi Nachman was buried in Uman, that's in Ukraine. And just before he died, he asked to be buried in the Ukraine. He was from Breslov, that's why that little town called Breslov. But he asked to be buried in Uman. And before he passed away, he told his Hasidim that if they will come to his tziyun, to his grave site in Rosh Hashanah, he will ימשוך אותם, I'm going to say this in Hebrew and translate it, ימשוך אותם בשערות ראשם מהגיהנום, something like that. He will save them. They will be redeemed just by visiting his grave during Rosh Hashanah. And pilgrimage to Uman has become a mass event. Every year, literally tens of thousands of Israelis go to Uman, to this, to the tziyun, to the grave site of Rabbi Nachman. בערב ראש השנה. בערב ראש השנה, there's an acronym, ראשי תיבות, of חודש אלול. Elul is the month, of course, of Rosh Hashanah, right before Tishrei, before the high holidays. And Elul is אני לאומן, אשתי לאמא שלה. I'm going to Uman and my wife will go to her mother. Because this is a male-only pilgrimage. So the women and the kid needs to find some sort of solution. Of course, they will go to the mother, maybe a better solution for everyone, I'm not sure. What's interesting, one of the things that really is interesting in this mass pilgrimage is that the people who are going, and this is also very typical to Israeli Jewish spirituality, is that the people who are going to Uman are not necessarily Breslov Hasidim. I mean, you don't have that many Breslov Hasidim probably. And you get people of all sectors going to Uman and making this pilgrimage. So you have Hasidim from other Hasidic groups, and you have Litvaks going. And you have Datim Lumi, modern Orthodox going. And you have Mizrachim, Mesoratim, Sephardic Jews, traditional Sephardic Jews going to Uman. Basically, everybody is going to Uman. Personally, if I was not a woman, I would probably go to Uman as well, just to check things out. It has been known for a very powerful spiritual experience. I guess if you don't mind being crammed with thousands of people in the same space, then yeah, it can probably be. You can see how cramped this is. Just people are standing on those posts.
They actually celebrate Rosh Hashanah there?
Yeah. They go right before Rosh Hashanah. It's a nightmare in the airport, so I've heard.
They must have special flights.
Yeah, well, I would not want to be on the flight with such a bunch of people. It's crazy. I heard it's really crazy, but also fun. So that's a Uman thing, and there's actually a documentary by a Jewish American director called Paul Mazorsky. I think it's called Whoopi. The Joy of Being Jew, or something like that. And it's about the pilgrimage. He joined this. He also went to Uman in Rosh Hashanah and is really excited about it. So that's a little bit about Breslov Hasidim. The other trend I would like to point out is this new Hasidic trend. And that's a little bit more complicated because the term Neo-Hasidic, it's been beginning to be used more and more, but it's still not really clearly defined. I use it to describe groups of people who are usually not from Haredi background, are not ultra-Orthodox. Usually they are modern Orthodox or Dati Leumi. But what they actually do is borrow, draw, glean, whatever term you want to use, from various Hasidic traditions. So these people would be, and this is the guy here on the left, these people would read and study stories of Rabbi Nachman in Breslov. He has lots of tales, very insightful tales. And they would sing music, Karlibach. You guys know about Rabbi Shlomo Karlibach? Okay, so Rabbi Shlomo, I heard a rumor he started here. I don't know. I've never really confirmed it in Penn, in Hillel, not Hillel, in Chabad in Penn, or Hillel in Penn.
What?
In Hillel, no.
He started in Lakewood, actually.
In Lakewood.
He was a Litva first.
Yeah, but then he became Chabadnik. Then he went to Chabad.
And then he became Karlach.
Yeah, exactly. Converted into Karlibachiyut. So I won't go into Karlibach, but there's a lot of music involved in this sort of spiritual work. So these people over there would use lots of music and tunes, and sing a lot in their prayers, and they would also be influenced by Rabbi Cook's, Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cook, who is a leading theologian of the National Orthodox, and he has some mystical writings as well, so they would be influenced by that. Basically, they're doing sort of kind of a mishmash of all various Hasidic practices and forms. Some of them would be very, very politically radical. This would be the people you might have heard of, the Hilltop Youth. Very radical, even violent groups of young settlers in the West Bank who are living on the hills in non-legal settlements. And some of them are involved in really non-legal and violent confrontations with the Palestinians populations in the West Bank. Others would not be as politically radical. They might be still living in the West Bank, in the Yehuda v'Shomron, but they would be much more peaceful and not as radical. Okay, I won't go. I mean, there was this rabbi called Rabbi Menachem Fuhrman, who passed away a year and a half ago, who may be a kind of a leader for this more peacefully inclined neo-Hasids. And one of the interesting things that Rabbi Fuhrman tried to advance is the notion of interfaith dialogue with the Palestinians based on the common and shared belief in God. So he would actually, before he entered the mainstream, Rabbi Fuhrman actually held meetings with Hamas leaders. That was about 15 years ago. He was very controversial for a while. He lived in the West Bank. He lived in Tkoa. It's in the area of Gush Etzion by Yerushalayim, if you know. But he believed in our rights, or the Jewish right over the land of Israel, but he also believed that Arabs have similar right to the same area, and one way of maybe confronting this conflict is by dialogue between Jews and Palestinians, and we have shared faith in one God. So he's a very interesting person, very unusual, non-conformist person, and some of his followers, and he used to meditate and study Rabbi Nachman's tales and all kind of things like that. So that would be the neo-Hasidic trend. Okay, so this is secular Jewish renewal, which is, I will say a few words on it, even though I'm not sure if I can really include it in Jewish spirituality, because it's definitely Jewish, but I'm not sure how spiritual it is. Jewish renewal is a relatively new movement in Israel by secular Israelis who insist on the right to study Jewish texts without being Orthodox, and to practice Judaism without being Orthodox. Now, I guess for Americans this is nothing new. I mean, it's basically known as cultural Judaism. We can study texts, we can go to Shabbat service, we don't necessarily have to do it in the Orthodox way. But for Israel, this is very radical because of this polarization between religious and secular. And these secular people are saying we want to study Talmud, we want to study Jewish philosophy, we want to study many other things, but we don't want to do it in the framework of a yeshiva study. We want to do it on our own grounds. So basically what they did is make up their own institutions for doing so. So there is a Bina secular yeshiva, And there's something called the pluralistic Batei Midrash, in which secular and Orthodox and women and men study together Jewish texts. They do have Kabbalot Shabbat there. It's called prayer communities. And one of the most visible and known project of these groups are the Kabbalat Shabbat in Tel Aviv seaport. Namal Tel Aviv, every Friday afternoon during the summer month, around 5 o'clock, they do a Kabbalat Shabbat. You can sense that this is like very sort of secular atmosphere to it. Of course, there are musical instruments, some traditional prayers, some Hebrew poems, pretty good ambient. It's nice. I mean, people go around, eat ice cream, sit around there. But for the people who are really involved in the movement, this is really Kabbalat Shabbat for them. This is prayer service in their eyes. There's also an attempt to hold secular weddings, which means not doing the wedding not within the Rabbanut, just like doing it independently, autonomously. A secular wedding, gender equal, egalitarian ritual. Ketubah, for instance, both men and women would break the cup. This is, of course, not recognized by the state. So if somebody has a secular wedding, he needs to go to Cyprus, so to go out of the country and have a civil wedding and then go back to Israel and be registered as married. And they have sort of social justice project like Passover Seder with Sudanese refugees in Tel Aviv. The reason I'm not including, or I hesitate to include this as Jewish spirituality, because I guess the spiritual dimension of Judaism is very small in this project. I mean, it's not clear, even talking to these people, how much they're doing it out of a cultural thing. Is it intellectual study? Is this identity issue? I'm a Jew, so I want to study Jewish stuff. For some of them, I think it is. There is a sort of spiritual dimension in it, but some of them, it's not that strong. It's more a need of community, I think. My sense is that for a lot of people, it's about community, being part of a group. Okay. Okay, so that's secular Jewish renewal. And here I go into the stuff that I'm interested. How long do I have? 10 minutes. Okay, so I will go briefly into what I call New Age Judaism. And I begin Defka with Jewish renewal here in the States. I define New Age Judaism as attempts to renew Judaism, as conscious and attempt to sort of renew Judaism by integrating Jewish tradition with non-Jewish sources. We have Jewish New Age mind-body techniques like Torah yoga. There's also Jewish mindfulness becoming very popular today. We have the Jewish Renewal Movement and the Jewish Renewal Prayer Service. And we have retreats like this one publicized here in Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center with courses like, it's hard to read, the Davenology towards daily prayer practice, connecting heaven and earth, Jewish contemplative practices in nature, the Great Turning, becoming, okay, this is really...
elder in our emerging world.
Good. Good eyesight. So these are things that are taking place in America. This is very, I mean, even for American Judaism, this is not very strong. It's not very big. I mean, if for Reconstructionism, it's probably the smallest denomination in Jewish life in America. Then this would be like tinier than Reconstructionism. Jewish Renewal usually do not define themselves as a denomination, but as transdenominational. They would say that we can, they'd like to inspire the denominations with some forms of Jewish spirituality. So I actually once attended it's called Aleph Kala. Aleph is the organization, the umbrella organizations for Jewish renewal communities in here in North America. And I attended the conference, and what I understood that 70% of the participants in the conference were not Jewish renewal. So people were coming from conservative background, from reform communities, and they're looking for some sort of Jewish spirituality, and they ended up in this retreat, not necessarily becoming Jewish renewal themselves. So people are looking around. My roommate in the conference was at that moment when I met her, she was very strong in Jewish renewal, but before that she was in Chabad for a while. She lived in Arizona, and that was like the Jewish place where she went. So people are looking around, tasting, trying, experimenting. And here I arrive at the two communities that I studied. I'm going to just talk about them very briefly. I studied two Jewish New Age communities in Israel that were active between 2000 and 2005. The first one was called Hamakom community. Hamakom is in Hebrew the place, but it's also one of the names of God. It was set they were active in Metzokei Dragot in the Judean desert. The second community was led by then Rabbi Mordechai Gafni. The community was called Beit Chadash. Both communities fell apart while I was doing my fieldwork on them. I mean, it was gradual. I first started working on this community. I started doing some fieldwork to meet the people, hoping that I will be able to immerse myself in the field, and then I realized they are falling apart. So I began with this community, and then they fell apart.
What did you do?
Well, the question, and at least in this case, it's not what I did, but what he did.
Was he convicted?
No, never.
Allegedly?
Well, it's not, in my point of view, it's not allegedly, but he did stuff, but he was never, he was accused by several members of his community of sexual misconduct. I'm going to say this very lightly. And he went back to the States. He's an American, and he re-emerged as a spiritual guru. And there's a lot of, recently there was an article published in the New York Times on him. And a lot of public debate whether the Jewish community should stand up and voice their clear statement about this person or not. It's a very problematic story.
Why did Rabbi Mordechai's Hamakom community fall apart?
Okay, my sense was for that community, it was a very small group, and they composed, that's the word, of very individualistic spiritual seekers who were very committed to their own spiritual search and who were not committed to the community. And at some point, various disagreements on various levels emerged. They lived together, so there are a lot of interaction, a lot of issues going on when you have such a small group living together. And when you don't have mutual commitment to some sort of clear vision, clean line of way of practice. I'm not, of course, talking even about mitzvot, just like, things we believe in and do together. Then when disagreements begin, it's very hard to hold together. So they just sort of, each one of them went his own way. There was, some people do think it's related to their engagement with Ohads and some other people engagement with issues of sexuality. But my take on it that this is part of the story, but not the story itself. But what for me, the things that were interesting in these communities is the thing they sort of try to reinvent Judaism or Jewish ritual in a new agey fashion. So this is the way Shabbat service looked like. So I guess if you are a liberal Jew, seeing a woman reading the Torah will not seem strange for you, but for Israelis not knowing liberal Judaism, this would be very, very subversive. But also you can see what she's wearing, and that's like the place where they're praying, and those candles, sort of this circular spiral arrangement of of the space. And this is a Kabbalat Shabbat in the other community, in Beit Chadash community. So you can see this whole sort of Far East influence on the way they sort of performed their prayer service. So they kind of look like a world music band, band playing world music with this African drum and sitting in this lotus position and singing. People would be sitting on the floor. They would take off their shoes when going into the space. The service itself, and maybe I'll end there.
Is the image on the left also from Beit Hadash, or is it from Hamakom?
This is from Hamakom, and this is from Beit Hadash. Okay, the communities also would do activities in the big New Agey festivals. They would have mitcham, a space in the community, and they would hold prayer service, I guess you can call it, in the festivals. So what I was not, I took this picture from the website, so I wasn't there, but my guess would be that the people we see inside are the community members. You can see the Sefer Torah here, and the people outside are just participants in the festivals. And this festival was held on the beach, so people are wearing bathing suits. That's one of the reasons I like this picture is it's so there's nigud, opposition between sort of spiritual dressed in white position as opposed to those people wearing barely nothing, I guess. And one of the things, I'm sorry, I should have, okay, this is one last thing about Ohad Ezrahi's project. This is something that also exists in New Age Judaism in the States. It's Hebrew shamanism or Jewish shamanism. Sort of integration, I'm not sure if to use that word, between shamanic ideas and shamanic or neo-shamanic ideas and Judaism. And I presented this picture in a conference, Jewish conference in Berlin, and there was this guy there who really went crazy when he saw this picture. It's like, that's not Judaism, that's pagan worship, that's Avodah Zarah, and he really went nuts. I'm not trying to say anything about what I'm going to say is more generally because I have to finish. My point is not to say whether something is Jewish or not Jewish. It's not, I don't think as an anthropologist or sociologist, it's not my position. I mean, if you ask Rachel, the person, I have my ideas. But as a sociologist or anthropologist, I don't try to decide whether something is Jewish, whether something is spiritual. Is it really spiritual? Are they really experiencing something when they're doing, I know, when they're chanting Shema Yisrael? But I do think it's interesting to know what's going on and to sort of try and see the relationship of things that we are maybe going in our own personal lives as Jews, or people who are looking for meaning, or people who are looking for some higher meanings in their life, and see the way that different people are trying to find these answers. And there's so many different things that are going on from various directions, be they orthodox or spiritual or new agey or whatever. So thank you very much for being patient with my English. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So the two communities that you studied, what was sort of like defined them, or how are they different from each other?
Oh.
Sort of defining characteristics of those particular
Like one against the other?
Yeah.
Or in general of what was shared by them? What was different? Okay, they both shared the vision of bringing a spiritual renewal to Judaism, to Israeli Judaism. So they all are motivated by their critique of Israeli orthodoxy and their attempt to sort of revive Judaism to what they think would be an authentic form of Jewish spirituality. So that's what they share. What they differed by would be very specific to each community. The leaders would be different, their styles would be different. The people were kind of different. I mean, the Hamakom community, they lived together. These people were kind of countercultural. Really artists, therapists of all sorts, really they wanted to live somewhere secluded, and were very committed to this idea of spiritual search within this community framework. The people in Beit Hadash were more normative, I guess, or more bourgeois, or just middle-class people who wanted to experience Jewish spirituality in a non-Orthodox way, but were not willing, to change, transform their lives. So each one had a job, and they met together, and they studied together, and they held retreats together. But that's about it. And the rest of it, the most of the difference is related to the really different styles of the two leaders.
So in general, is it very dependent on certain central figures?
I think every new movement, not even necessarily religious movement, but every new movement, most new movements, social movements, rely on charismatic leadership. When you have something new going on, there's usually a leader, somebody who will, stand forth and say, yeah, we should do this, and the followers would follow him. So in this sense, at least my take is these communities were not that different from other avant-garde attempts at social change. But there's also this kind of tension when you have a charismatic leader, and these two people are very charismatic, each in his own way, and the way they can really influence and also do some terrible stuff. Hitler was a very charismatic person, and he did some problematic stuff. So charisma has its own dangers. If you go around, even looking at the sort of non-spiritual, secular Jewish renewal, you can identify who are the leaders, who are the charismatic personality, and charisma helps. Really, we're drawn to all of us are drawn to charisma, I guess. It's a grace of God, after all. Yeah.
How would you compare?
Could you just tell me your name?
Shmi Jesse.
Hi, Jesse.
How would you compare Rabbi Ochad Mizrahi, forgetting about Gafni, Ochad Mizrahi and his movement to the Breslov movement today? And because a lot of the times they have not very Jewish, not very religious observant, and also comparing and contrasting them.
Okay. I think that the important difference between them is that this is the Breslov Orthodox, right? They're committed to halachic, to the halacha, to the observance of the mitzvot. They do it in their own very, I guess, quaint fashion, but they are committed. And Ohad's project was declarative, often mutzhar, it wasn't orthodox, it wasn't observant. Ohad came from the circles. He's a very interesting person. He had a very, very unique biography. He started off as secular, and then he became Chozer B'Tshuva, and he was a Belzer Hasid, and then he was a West Bank settler belonging to some radical right-wing group, and then he became kind of more moderate and became more connected and taught in some yeshivas that are more moderate, modern Orthodox, and then he sort of left Orthodoxy completely and started his yeshiva. And it's a point of view of what do, and the thing, this is why the point that I stress the point of self-authority and sacralization of the self in New Age thought, because this is exactly the difference. Why would you not observe halacha, right? If you believe in Jewish spirituality, but if you believe that the real truth is coming from the inside, then you really disengage from the law, from the outside external obligations and duty and for abiding the halacha, because you can look inside yourself and know what is true or not. So I remember at some point, I'm not sure what he's doing now, that I asked him, are you Shomer Shabbat? Where exactly he stands about Shmirat Shabbat? And said, yeah, well, I'm not Shomer Shabbat, but I only drive for things that are connected, and I drive on Shabbat, but only for things that I think that are important for Shabbat. Something like that. So you make your own laws for yourself. And I think really that's a big difference between the sort of non-orthodox forms of Jewish spirituality. How do you relate to the law? And authority, and rabbi is authority. It's not only the law, it's authority of rabbi. So do you obliged? Do you do whatever your rabbi tells you? Or do you just consult him and then do whatever you think is right? Yeah.
How did you become interested in this work?
You should blame Philip. Well,
We worked on social movements.
we worked in social movements. I was doing my master's on Chabad, and then I knew I wanted to do something about Jewish spirituality in Israel. I was interesting, and not non-mainstream, I guess, Jewish spirituality, new things that are going on. I think the change is what really interests me. Why things are changing, into what directions. And then I remember just sitting in your office, and I ran all sort of a list of things that might be interested. And when I mentioned Ohad Ezrahi, he said, yeah. So that's how I became interested.
I meant in general.
In general.
Sociology or-
In sociology? Well, in sociology or in religion? Because I think those are two my points of interest.
Sociology of religion?
Yeah. Why do I became because I think in sociology I'm interested because I didn't start in sociology. I started off I actually did start in sociology and English literature. And then after 3 weeks in my bachelor degree, I left sociology because I was so intimidated by the theories. And then I did something else, and then I ended up graduating in psychology and English literature. And I knew I wanted to study further, and I think sociology, for me, it gives really a broad perspective of the way things are happening, and what compels us as a person to do stuff we do. And that things are wider coming from psychology, which I found very narrow perspective on what makes up a person. I found that looking at the cultural aspect and the social aspect to really give not the whole answer, but pretty good answers to why things are looking the way are. So why, and I keep doing it even in Philadelphia. I sit on the bus and I'm thinking about this black woman wearing certain thing, as opposed to this black woman as opposed to white women. So why are the black women speaking this kind of strange English dialect, as opposed to a white woman who would dress differently and talk differently? And this would be, and I would think, okay, so this is because they're black and white, or maybe because they have different cultures, and how does this became the way it is? So I find it's a good way of explaining things around me, understanding, it's not even explaining, just understanding the world around me. And religion is probably because I grew up in a religious background, an Orthodox background, and having left the fold, as they say, I still am interested in what drives people on. In a sense, not being part of what they are, but also still being, in a sense. So having a religious family and living in this part of halfway here, halfway there, I guess. I don't know, it's interesting.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you for being patient.